It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Pete Weber, who is the voice of the Nashville Predators. How are you doing today?
Doing outstanding. It's a little strange this season, and we have to be flexible, right, Brandon? Because all of a sudden we think we have a game to do that night, and then it's postponed because of this COVID situation that pervades our entire world.
Yes, we do. Can you talk about, of course, how you got started being the voice of a Nashville Predators?
How I got started? Well, in a way, I got to go back to how I really got started in the business, and this might be lengthy. Are you prepared for that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. As a kid growing up in the 60s in Western Illinois in a town called Galesburg, my parents fortunately furnished my bedroom on the nightstand with a nice Zenith radio, rich in sound and tremendous ability to pick up the 50,000 watt stations around the Midwest and some outside that sphere that in those days tended to carry a lot of play-by-play sports. So I would get WBAP in Dallas when the only sports team there was something called the Cowboys, CCO in Minneapolis with the Twins, the North Stars, and the Vikings, WTMJ in Milwaukee, which carried the Milwaukee Braves. Yes, they were there until 1965. And then the Green Bay Packers, WJR in Detroit, where they had the Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Tigers. So I got a lot of early exposure to Ernie Harwell. And obviously closer to me, the Chicago radio stations with the Blackhawks, the Bears, the Cubs, the White Sox, even the Chicago Fire soccer team. But the station that really drew me in was 1120 KMOX in St. Louis. I was a Cardinals fan, and I wanted to listen to whatever was going on with my favorite ball player, who was Stan Musial at that time. Now, Stan retired in 1963, but I stayed with the Cardinals ever since. But the guys doing the games on KMOX seemed to be enjoying themselves so very much. They were Harry Carey, Jack Buck, and for a time as well, Joe Garagiola. And then later on, okay, so I'm a young guy, and later on I find out they were getting paid to do this, Brandon. Paid to watch a ball game, describe and talk about it. So I thought, well, if I would ever get that chance, that would be something that I would like to pursue. Fast forward, my senior year in high school. I couldn't play football because I had pinched a nerve in my neck on a blocking sled. So I got a job with my hometown newspaper, the Galesburg Register Mail, primarily to take calls on prep game nights. But finally, they sent me out to cover some games. And one was my particular high school, Galesburg Costa, playing at Deer Creek Mackinac outside Peoria. And I get there to this tiny shack of a press box. And there were 3 radio broadcasts going on that night. And one of them, right next to where I was seated, included the morning team, the 2-man morning team on one of the radio stations in Galesburg. It's 8:30 on a Friday night. They've just gone through a full week of probably 3:30, 4 o'clock wake-up calls to do the morning show. And then when you're doing morning shows during the week and doing something extra on Friday night, what usually takes over? We didn't have 5-hour energy then or any of those energy drinks. They had to use coffee. If you use coffee, sooner or later, you have to avail yourself of the restroom facilities. So we were up ladder, and then the guy who was doing the play-by-play handed me his microphone saying, I'll be back in about 5 minutes. So I was sort of thrust into the role right away. Things that I had been recreating in my mind, but never doing out loud. And doing those 5 or 6 minutes made me realize I probably would be able to do this. So I pursued that, going on the next year to Notre Dame, worked the campus radio station. And I mentioned Joe Garagiola working with Jack Buck and Harry Carey. Well, Joe Garagiola Jr. was my sports director at the campus radio station. So things somehow or another all seem to tie in. So I just went on from there. Went to Buffalo to work for an all-news radio station. Went to Los Angeles to do the Los Angeles Kings color. Went to Seattle to do play-by-play on the Seattle Supersonics. Remember them? You might be too young. It's been a while since they were there. They're the Oklahoma City Thunder today. And then went back to Buffalo, and I carved together there really a bunch of freelance assignments that turned into Buffalo Bison baseball, Buffalo Bills football, the college games, Rochester Red Wings baseball. And then in 1998, or 97 actually, I was in my home office in Kenmore, New York, upstairs on this not exactly high speed, it was dial-up internet, but on the Prodigy service, I got this story. The NHL is awarding provisional franchises to Nashville, Atlanta, Columbus, and Minnesota. I called downstairs to my wife, Claudia, and I said, Claudia, since you have your parents and your sister and their families in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, wouldn't our holidays be a lot easier if I pursued and was lucky enough to get the Nashville job? They weren't called the Predators or anything yet. It was just a year and say 5 months before they started play. And she said, yeah, so let's go after it. I FedExed my stuff. On that Prodigy internet service, I found the name of the founding owner of the team and where he lived in Racine, Wisconsin, and FedExed my materials to him the next day. Then just began following up for a year. Then I got a break. A guy who had been the public relations director, or public relations man for the Buffalo Sabres, Jerry Helper, got hired as the director of communications with the Predators. He helped push my resume toward the top of the pile. And by August of 98, and we started training camp that next September, I was under contract. So that is a roundabout way of answering your very simple question. I apologize for that.
That's so amazing that you got that opportunity. Can you talk about, of course, your time with the LA Kings as the color coordinator?
Absolutely. And in those days, in Los Angeles anyway, there was not a separate radio and TV team. So when we did TV on the old KHJ Channel 9, we would do 20 to 25 simulcasts a year. I worked with Bob Miller, and he was a reason I got the job to begin with, because when I was doing Notre Dame hockey, he was doing Wisconsin hockey. So we kind of got together that way. And the guy who was doing Colorado college hockey at that time, Rich Murata, had preceded me with the Kings, and he left to take a full-time job at KNX Radio in LA. So doing the color was fascinating for me. I was blessed to be able to talk about the exploits of one Marcel Dion, Hockey Hall of Famer. Ultimately, he was en route to 300 of his 700 plus NHL goals at that time. And then I was also the travel coordinator for the Kings, right? We doubled up. The front offices weren't as expansive as they are now. So I went out to Detroit Metro Airport and from our Springfield Farm Club. His name, Charlie Simmer. The next day, he would play the first of many games with Marcel Dion and Dave Taylor and form what became known as the Triple Crown line, the most prolific scoring line in the NHL at that time. As a matter of fact, that was a line that started the 1981 All-Star game in Los Angeles together, and that was one of the more thunderous ovations I ever heard. But I learned a lot, and I think I was helped to learn a lot by being the travel coordinator as well, because we traveled commercially. And there were a bunch of hockey players that did not exactly want to have middle seats on the commercial flights. But sometimes I was given a heavy burden of those. So I drew up by seniority who had played the most NHL games on down to who had played the least. So the guys who had played the least were the guys who got the center seats.
That's amazing. Can you talk about the difference, of course, between being a color coordinator and a play-by-play?
Yeah, color, you're trying to answer this question, how and why. And in play-by-play, you have to describe, you have to locate the geography on the ice, and then identify who has the puck and what they're doing with it. Now, this is, I think, an even more important distinction on radio rather than it is on television. But I still think those are clearly the parts. And in color, I understood right away. And Al Michaels wrote it in his book when he was discussing doing the Miracle on Ice team in 1980, when ABC asked him, who would you like to be your color commentator? And he quickly pointed out, excuse me, they then recently retired goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens, Ken Dryden, because he says Ken, having had his great legal training, understood he had about 6 or 8 seconds to get in your thoughts, and then you had to turn things back over to the play-by-play guy, which is something I've tried to follow, whether I was doing play-by-play or color.
Can you talk about, of course, you said you have 6 seconds to do that and stuff. How difficult is it sometimes to see the play and then be like, okay, I have to say this, this, and this within that 6 seconds?
Sometimes you only have a time to say this and this. You don't have the third this that you could fit in there. So you just have to know what's most important and be able to prioritize mentally before these begin to move.
Can you talk about, of course, your time getting to the Nashville Predators, being the voice of the Predators?
Sure. I'd always wanted to be in on the birthing of a franchise. And so this is the opportunity I got in 1998. And to still be here 22 years later is remarkable to me because I've been all over the map, like I've described to you already. Buffalo, Los Angeles, Seattle, South Bend, my hometown of Galesburg, and now here in Nashville. And actually, I've been here now longer than I have been at any other stop. And that, Buffalo is about 20 years, so 22 years plus here and counting. The time in Nashville, I was sort of lucky, Brandon, because I got exposed to it doing minor league baseball in the summers. The Buffalo Bisons and the Nashville Sounds were in the same league, the American Association, which was essentially the central part of the country, from the period from 85 through 97. And the period 85 through 95, I was the everyday voice of the Bisons. So I had 3 or 4 trips every summer to Nashville. So I was somewhat familiar with it. But I also have to counsel you, because you live at the ballpark when you're in a town. And Greer Stadium was fine functional facility. But I never thought I would end up living here, because I thought, boy, that place is hot. I mean, hot. And I'm a northern guy. And, I don't have to sit in a sweat box all the time. Well, hey, I solved it with hockey. We don't sweat doing hockey.
Can you talk about, of course, what the day-to-day is like on game day?
And it's a little bit different now because of COVID and what we are doing. But let me do you what is so-called normal times. On a game day when the Preds are at home, I go to the morning skate of the team and then attend usually the follow-up morning skate from the visiting team. Unless they had played a game the night before, they usually forego the skate. But that gives us a chance to talk with the people traveling with the team members themselves, and get some interviews gathered and used for the pregame show that night, or just for deep background information. Get line combinations and defense pairs. And sometimes I find out who the starting goaltenders are going to be for that particular game. Come home, assemble my notes. Now, here's the critical thing. Take a nap, about 45 minutes or so, and then you're refreshed when you wake up, go back to the rink, and call the game. But the other days, preparing for these, for example, I will watch my TV in here hooked up to the direct TV so I can watch the other NHL games. That's how I really prepare for the opponents, by watching them. And early in a season, as it is right now, it is not as easy because I won't have as much video ready to take a look at, though some of that is available online via NHL.com. So while I prepare for one game, I might be preparing for 2 or 3. Now, in this COVID era, I go to the rink for the skate. We then have a Zoom interview with the coach and maybe some of the players, and then come home and do those other things to prepare for the broadcast that night. But the days in between, for example, okay, we were postponed last minute thing Tuesday with Carolina, but I used that time to prepare for Dallas. And again, Dallas is going to be more difficult to prepare for because of COVID, they did not play their first 4 games. Their first game of the season is going to be against the Predators. At least I think so. Because
Can you talk about, of course, like you said, you played against the Hurricanes. Can you talk about what happens whenever you play back-to-back? Like I just saw that you played back-to-back against the Hurricanes.
Well, we would have, but the second game was postponed because of COVID concerns. We played consecutive games to start the year against Columbus. And that really gets, I think, a broadcaster in the mindset of it's like a playoff series. So you do all your preparation for all the players before the first game, and then you simply refresh that before going to the next, rather than going back from, point zero and building up again. So that's what this whole season is going to be about. If you take a look at our schedule, other than where we have these last moment postponements, and you have to put things back together again. But that's the playoffs is the most fun part of the year. And these being like mini playoff series, energizes me, I'll tell you that much.
Can you talk about, of course, like with fans not being allowed to be in attendance, how important is it to like be the voice of the fans and like energize, where like you would have those fans like pumping up the players?
Well, they pump up me too. I mean, when it's right now, Dallas is going to be, I don't know exactly how many. They will be allowing fans for the games Friday and Sunday nights upcoming. We had maybe 100 people. We've had 2 scrimmages, one of which was open to the public, and then the 3 games, 2 against Columbus and 1 against Carolina, with very minimal. But the NHL has the local teams pump in artificial or crowd noise off NHL 2020, the video game, or 2021 now. And so that helps a little bit. But I got to tell you, after doing the return to play games entirely from a studio in the basement of our arena back in August, the competition that I see on the ice is just what pumps me up. Yeah, the players, it's clearly they feed off that fan noise without any question. And sometimes I'm very happy in Bridgestone Arena that I have a headset on so I don't go deaf.
What is some of your favorite moments and memories of being the voice of the Predators?
The first game, when there was a standing ovation before the opening faceoff. Now, that was the first NHL game in Nashville, but they had up to that point, roughly 35 years of minor league hockey here in town. They had the Eastern League Dixie Flyers. They had the Southern Hockey League with the Nashville South Stars, an affiliate of Minnesota North Stars. And then they had the ECHL's Nashville Knights, who had a number of players who went on to the NHL that were still around the NHL when the Predators began play in '98. Glenn Metropolitan among them, who I think at that time, by the time the Predators came in, he was playing for the Washington Capitals. So the crowd here has steadily grown since the team went over to largely local ownership in 2007. It's been an incredible synergy between the fans and the players. For example, the team was basically stripped down for sale in the summer of 2007. Thomas Vokoun, who was about to make a $5 million deal, was sent off to Florida. Scott Hartnell, Kimmo Timonen were traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. And Paul Kariya, they didn't have the money to offer Paul Kariya another contract after his 2 years here in free agency. So they really had to struggle to make the playoffs the next year. And they had a big game. Was it the next to last home game against the St. Louis Blues, where the team was down a goal. They really needed the 2 points that night. So without any provocation from the public address or from the Jumbotron, with the last commercial timeout of the third period, the fans just spontaneously began a standing ovation to will the team on to the victory. And it worked. And it's something, it's a tradition that really is carried on to this day, 13 years for now, 14 years later.
That's amazing. Who are some of your favorite players that have played, former or present, like PK Shuko? Who are some of your former players that have played that you have called?
Well, my unrelated son, Shea Weber, has to be right up there. Thomas Vokoun was the goaltender who took the team to its first playoff series. Matter of fact, I did a Zoom show with him on the Predators alumni situation last night. And he is still in the U.S., working in Florida, working in hockey development there, working with youngsters. Tom Fitzgerald is now the general manager of New Jersey, the team's first captain. I mentioned Kimmo Timonen, Scott Hartnell, a tremendous individual. There may be too many for me to name anymore, because then I'll just be reading the list of Preds alumni, and I don't know if you need that right now.
What advice would you give upcoming future sports commentators and voice of programs that is looking to get into it?
Number one, you have a great tool available that I certainly didn't have back then, and that is the internet. You can get your work out there. You can also use that to advertise yourself for possible openings. Because the key to everything, and I'll tell you this, Brandon, I think one of the best books I've read in recent times was The Outliers. And that was a book wherein Malcolm Gladwell talks about how important it is to become good at whatever it is you want to do, to get your reps. You can get your reps on the internet. You can call games that might only be for your purposes, but you can call games, put the video up there or put the audio up there and listen to yourself and correct whatever you think you need. And I think that is a marvelous opportunity. Now, I'm glad you didn't ask me what to do for writers, because with the deaths, unfortunately, of so many publications right now, I don't know what to advise them other than get a blog up and going and go after it that way.
That's wonderful. Where can my listeners find, of course, the Nashville Predators on social media along with you?
Okay, at Preds NHL on Twitter, myself at Pete Weber Sports on Twitter. And if you want to listen to NHL games, and you can do it, I still think, for free at NHL.com, where you go to the scoreboard, and then you'll see a little pair of headphones up in the right corner. And then you can choose which radio broadcast you'd like to listen to.
That's wonderful. Thank you again, Pete, for your interview, and best of luck in this upcoming season due to COVID with the NHL.
Brandon, I thank you so much for the interview, and I apologize a bit for the coffee-heavy voice this morning, but hey, that happens on occasion. Best of luck to you going forward.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you again, Pete, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.